Hi, my name is Talbot Imlay, and I teach history at the Université Laval in Quebec, Canada. And I'm here to briefly talk about an article that I have forthcoming in the Review of International Studies. The article is entitled "The International Studies Conference: Peaceful Change and the Transformation of International Studies in the United States During the Pre-War and Interwar Years." The subject, as the title suggests, is the transformation of international studies, a field which during the interwar period was characterized by its multinational, multidisciplinary, multi-conceptual nature, and which after 1945 becomes international relations, a field that Stanley Hoffman famously described in the 1970s as, quote, born and raised in America, unquote, and one closely associated with political science and with realism as its dominant paradigm. The argument in the paper is twofold. I mean, I essentially argue that there are two elements key to understanding this transformation. One is the International Studies Conference, which was a League of Nations associated international or transnational organization dedicated to fostering cross-national collaboration on international affairs. And the second element is the question of peaceful change, the question of how to revise an international order or elements or major elements of it by means other than war, which was the subject of the ISC, the International Studies Conference's 1937, a gathering in Paris, which was the organization's principal event during the 1930s. The question of peaceful change became a pressing one during the 1930s, partly in response to the revisionist demands of Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. In the United States, this interest, I argue, morphed into a wide-ranging and multifaceted inquiry into the nature of international relations, their underlying dynamics, their animating forces, as well as into the role of the United States in international relations. The paper tries to argue the U.S. committee to the ISC was a critical site and a critical actor in this inquiry, both because its membership was broadly representative of the field at the time and included representatives of some of the principal actors in international studies in the United States during the interwar period, private foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment, organizations like the Council for Foreign Relations, the Foreign Policy Association, the Institute for Pacific Relations, as well as several major research universities. And the second reason why I think the ISC committee, the American ISC committee is so important is because it embodied two frameworks for understanding or studying international studies. One framework was associated with the ISC, which emphasized multinational, multidisciplinary, and multi-conceptual approaches. The second framework embodied in this committee was one that emphasized far more U.S. and power politics. It was a much more U.S. and power politics centered approach, basically. So what happens? Well, basically, I argue that in 1930, it was at American insistence that the 1937 Paris ISC had as its principal subject peaceful change, but it was disappointment, American disappointment with the conference, particularly the perceived failure to discuss seriously the question of peaceful change, which decisively tipped the balance in the U.S. committee away from the ISC centered framework and towards the more U.S. and power politics centered one. At the same time, as I try to show in the paper, the question of peaceful change continued to animate the inquiry even after 1937 in the United States into the nature of international relations. And what I try to show is that peaceful change fostered a type of tripartite understanding of international relations centered on three different principal elements. One was world government. The second was the complete absence of world government, which would become known as anarchy, and international organizations such as the League of Nations. If world government was deemed the most conducive to peaceful change, and this was because of the domestic analogy, basically peaceful change works at the national level because there's a government and all that that entails. And so to make it work at the international level, you need the equivalent. If peaceful change seemed to be I'm sorry, if world governments seemed to be the most conducive to peaceful change, the problem is almost all scholars and experts agreed was that world government was utopian. It was not going to be achieved. As for international organization, which was another, which might be conducive to peaceful change, uh, that argument was undermined by the weakness of the League, which by 1930s is generally deemed to be a failure. And this left anarchy, or the complete absence of world government, and with very little, if any, effective international institutions or organizations, world gov the anarchy effectively ruled out peaceful change, uh, but it was extremely favorable to the U.S. and power politics centered framework that was emerging as the dominant framework for international relations. So quickly to sum up, I'm an historian by training and inclination, and I use a variety of sources to try to tell this story. The archives of the Rockefeller Foundation, League of Nations archives, as well as the private papers at the Library of Congress and elsewhere of various people involved in the ISC and the ISC American community. But I hope this article will appeal or interest IR scholars, and two groups, I suppose, two groups that seems we might potentially be interested. One is those in HIR, Historical International Relations, who are interested in the origins of IR as a discipline, and especially this explaining how what before the war was a very different field than what it becomes after the war. It seems to me that this needs to be explained. And the other group, which perhaps is also probably also associated with HIR, are those scholars interested in how realism not only developed, but became if not the dominant paradigm for understanding international relations in the United States after 1945 as we enter the Cold War. So that's it. I hope if you read the article, I hope you like it. And of course, if you have any feedback or comments, I would love to have them because this is part of a larger book project on peaceful change and its influence on American thinking and or understanding of international relations after 1945. So there it is. Thank you.